Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dawn of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 30, Dreams Within Dreams. Now, if you remember back when we discussed chapter 2, I said that there was more to that chapter. That was the chapter with 11-year-old Yangchen meditating with Yangchen into the spirit world for the first time. I said we would come back to that. Since then, of course, we have found out that Yangchen died in spiritual related matters. Like her body died, she was trapped in the spirit world somehow, and then obviously on Inca Island she was shown a vision of Yangchen's spirit, still alive of course, potentially more or less in the fog of lost souls. This chapter is what finally connects the dots. This shows us what happened, that yes, on that first trip to the spirit world, that's when Yangchen died. That's when the incident happened. That's what this chapter is about. So we do start off with a quick, present day lead up to the flashback, and it's just Yangchen on Nujian, of course her bison, on her way to Port Tugok down in the south. So it's going to be a long journey, but it's not like exceptionally long, but it's still like, half the world. She's going from more or less an island more in the middle of the world down like south, to one of the islands. So it's still quite a long time. And she basically just talks about here that, she tries to sleep here a bit. She eats very sparingly from the rations that she has. But most of them have to go to Nujian, who otherwise is kind of struggling, not having all that much food. And it is noted right at the end of this, before we jump into the flashback, that part of Yangchen wished she had listened to Kavik and not come alone. So, there's a slight sense of like that she has grown to really be fond of him and wishes he was here, wishes she had her companion here. But this is when we cut to flashback. So I feel like I nearly have to just read this thing in full, so we'll take our time to go through this. It does just go over here to the idea that Yangchen's previous visits to the spirit world had prepared her well to guide Yangchen through her first. The older nun stepped sure-footed across a brook of flowing crystal. Yangchen just had to walk where she walked. Interesting line here. The spirit world is different things to different people at different times, but it's safe as long as you keep respect in your heart. The more you can ask, listen, and give thanks to your surroundings before your impact is felt, the better. Even holding the intention in your mind is good. So this is sort of getting across the idea. Like a good episode to watch to understand some of the events of this chapter is definitely Legend of Korra, Book 2 Spirit, Episode 10, A New Spiritual Age. That's the episode when Korra goes to the spirit world for the first time. They deal with a lot of the same concepts here, in that content very much is where this is based on. So, and that's just that idea of a human, especially a powerful human like the Avatar, can have a drastic effect on the spirit world just through their thoughts and emotions. So the idea that Yangchen is saying here, always think about, respecting the spirit world. Always think about just like, I understand, I'm appreciative of this, and I respect that. And that will help regardless of like what happens, basically. So Yangchen asks, can we bend here? And they give a quick explanation again of like, no, they've meditated into the spirit world, so their bodies aren't here, so they can't bend. Because bending is a physical ability, so you need your body to do it. A lot of the pretty standard stuff. The Abbess and Sering are looking after our bodies. If we feel the need, we can remember where we are, thinking about waking up, and we will. So there's sort of like an explanation for sort of how you end a trip to the spirit world. If you're sort of like experienced that, oh yeah, like if you can just like meditate and go in, it's sort of this idea of while you're in there, it's like a reverse meditation out of just like remembering the situation of like the real world situation, and you can go back out. That it's nice to just get that, even if it's not like super detailed. So we then get the idea that, okay, this seems like simple advice, but for Yangchen, the idea of like simply waking up is a bit of a challenge, because this is obviously 11-year-old Yangchen still struggling with the way the past avatars sort of take over her, and there's always been a bit of a trouble with her waking up from those bouts. So there might be a sense that the waking up from the spirit world might be a challenge for Yangchen as well, because it's a similar idea. So, what does it say here? If all her senses were telling her that her body was here amid these shining, swirling colors, she would have to defy her own mind to escape. Because you get a little moment of Yangchen like looking at her hands and being like, my form here in the spirit world, even though my physical body isn't here, looks exactly the same. I've got all the same calluses on my hands. So it's almost this sense of like you have to trick yourself into realizing that your physical body is out there in the other world. Go back to it. So this makes Yangchen a little bit nervous, but she glances over at Jetson just ahead of her and is like, yes, I can do this. If she can do it, I can do it. So neither of them realized the warning that Jetson had spoken aloud. Different things to different people. So they just covered the idea that they walk through a forest, they're moving along, and then they come across the first, I suppose, spirits that sort of come across their way. They see some of them off in the distance, but the first ones that kind of come near them are these ones. So I'll just put the visual up on screen here because it's clearly a direct reference to this. So they come across these, which the book describes as being shishis, or I'll get to the pronunciation in a second. So it's spelled S-H-I-S-H-I, no space or anything like that. The audiobook pronounces it shur, in the same way that oddly the audiobook pronounces Tianhai Shi as Tianhai Shur. I'm guessing it's just some quirk of pronunciation, but anyway, that's the idea. So they come across some of these things, which we saw obviously in A New Spiritual Age. We see this, a creature stepped out from behind them. It looked like a tiger-dillo, clothed in blue. Either it wore a pointed hat on its head, or it possessed a horn that looked exactly like one. Painted red lips curled back to reveal rows of jagged white fangs curving in random directions, more hedge thorns than teeth. Jetson says that they look intimidating, but they're playful. And she's expecting a response from Yangchen about this, but then the narration is like, the avatar had frozen in place. What's wrong? You're not afraid of beasts. You had the southern chieftain's polar bear dog eating out of your hand when you were 8. So, again, Yangchen is good with animals. So, why the fear of basically spirit animals is basically the question here. If she's fine with like a polar bear dog, which I guess is of a somewhat equivalent size, these, in this form, shouldn't be too much of an issue. And it noted that, like animals loved her, she loved them back. But Yangchen wasn't the person whose terror the Shur were smelling. The nuns of the Western Temple had erred. Dagmola, Sering, Jetson, and even Yangchen herself, they all believed a visit to the spirit world could help her establish a solid identity, bolster her young mind against the ancient anguish, an extra tether she could rely on when the ghosts of the Four Nations became too strong. But they'd never considered an overwhelming memory occurring inside the spirit world, brought on by a previous avatar's fear of the realm beyond the physical. So basically, she's having one of these sort of past avatar kind of panic attacks. And the thing triggering this is that obviously some or multiple previous avatars were afraid, terribly afraid of the spirit world. Maybe even these creatures exactly, but the spirit world itself. And Yangchen is having that. When otherwise they felt that effectively, I suppose, if you could unlock your own spiritual talents, that's another thing that is you very specifically. But no, this has actually caused one of these incidents. Yangchen is completely frozen here. But then, what happens? The Shusher licked their savouring lips. Their eyes, which at first seemed mere daubs on a flat scroll, gained more depth and focus. Their faces wrinkled with human-like, malevolent contours. And of course, what's happening here is that through Yangchen's fear, these spirits have gone dark. And of course, we get to see the Shusher dark in A New Spiritual Age as well. In that episode, it's reversed. Korra encounters them dark because she's afraid, and then her positivity turns them light. This is the reverse happening here. Yangchen, or rather a past avatar through Yangchen's fear, has turned them dark. And Jetson's getting worried at this point and is like, Yangchen, you can wake up now. And Yangchen, it says here, she tasted flowing blood. She'd bitten a chunk out of the inside of her cheek. Her knees locked up. The pack of spirits fanned out into a hunting formation. And at this point, Jetson realizes, I've got to do something here. She grabs Yangchen and starts running. And then there's an interesting reveal here. Because Jetson was holding her charge so close, she was unable to see the child Yangchen had become. So we get the other element of A New Spiritual Age, which was obviously that Korra turns into a younger version of herself because of her fear of the spirit world. And the same thing happens to Yangchen here. Obviously, it's a bit more extreme there, in that goes from being like, 17, 18-year-old Korra to being, as we see here, like kind of 4-year-old Korra. Here, it's, 11-year-old goes to being like a pretty young child. Her hands had shrunk to become a younger, smaller size, and she cried out in an unfamiliar pattern. Not ma or mama or ma. I'm not sure what this line in the book is necessarily about, in that, like, are they trying to say that Yangchen has gone so far back that she's like a very young, like, baby, and so is only making sounds? Or is there meant to be a significance to the fact that she says AAM, AAM, instead of ma, M-A, M-A-M-A, or AM-MA? Just a little bit of a weird one there about what exactly is being got at there. They don't really seem to linger on it or anything like that. Jetson continues to say, wake up, I won't leave you here, wake up for me and I'll be right behind you. And effectively, like, Jetson kind of, like, in a way runs into a bit of a dead end and realizes that, like, oh, I can't get across this sort of spirit river that we've come across. What are we going to do? And so Jetson rips off her shawl, wraps Yangchen up in it so that her face is covered, and then, like, throws Yangchen, this kind of baby Yangchen, into the air and screams, wake up. And it says, Yangchen fell, but never landed. Not in the riverbank or in a bilious flow, she opened her eyes back in her own skin. So this has forced Yangchen out of the spirit world, but Jetson is trapped. She saw Abbas Dagmola cradling Jetson's slumped over body, trying to rouse her. Sering stared at Yangchen like a musician who'd left the last note of a piece unplayed. Yangchen would forever remember the moment as the first time she was asked a question beyond her years, begged for an answer she couldn't provide. Avatar, Sering whispered, what happened? So, that is the chapter. It's in a way like kind of exactly as you would expect, but it's a nice, like, inclusion. This is the thing I was alluding towards in the early chapters, that this is the main other significant impact of the whole past Avatar plaguing, haunting thing. This is it. Again, they don't tell you which past Avatar was afraid of the spirit world, just it seems reasonable that one was, and Yangchen is affected by it here. It's this mistake. They felt the spirit world would be a way to help Yangchen with her issues and not like trigger a different thing. And that's exactly what happens. They meet light spirits, should be fine for Yangchen being good with animals. They turn dark because of her fear, and things go very, very wrong. Because Yangchen is so frozen in fear, she can't do the thing of remember where she is in the physical world and wake up. So Jetson has to find a way to force her to wake up and effectively sacrifices herself to do so. She can't get away herself and so has to throw Yangchen into the air. And this is why we constantly get those moments of Yangchen always remembering the words, wake up, really loudly from Jetson. And this is the impact of that in a way, Yangchen blames herself for what happened to the closest person in the world to her, the most important person, died saving her. So, interesting stuff, because this obviously gives you the full context of like, okay, now what? Now what do we do with this? Because Yangchen now knows that Jetson's spirit is somewhere in the spirit world. What's going to go on there? Next chapter, I believe, goes into this a little bit more. It is more of a direct continuation here while she arrives at Port Tugok. But I appreciate that the chapter, for the most part, is just lead into the flashback and the flashback itself. It's really strong, nice reference to a similar event from Legend of Korra with, I suppose, the earlier chapter was more of like the events of the guide episode. This is the events of a new spiritual age. Nice connections overall, and using the Shirshir as a spirit that we remember is pretty interesting overall, because of course they are terrifying in a way in the end. In that, like, I believe at the end of a new spiritual age, like Korra is nearly like bitten in half by one of the dark Shirshirs. So it makes sense that they do look quite terrifying in their dark form, as you can see here. So really nice that we have that visual to go with this chapter if you didn't like make the connection yourself. But yeah, really strong stuff. So far, like the Kyoshi books and the Yangchen books have done like the flashback content really, really well, and that the Kavik stuff with his brother, nice. But then you have the sort of more kind of crazy, eventful Avatar flashback here with the Spirit World event. That's also really, really well done. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this chapter. Other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.